Every once in a while, it is important for us to put the shoe on the other foot. I know it's uncomfortable, I know it doesn't make a lot of sense to you, but sometimes it's really important to understand whether or not you have two left feet. Okay, that was a terrible joke. I apologize. In fact, I will be removing that from this video. It was so bad. The point I was trying to make is you have to put yourself in the position of the people you criticize. So I ask myself, would I condemn morally depraved behavior, terrible criminality, horrible acts of violence, if the group responsible for that violence was a group that I was personally attached to, or a group that I myself thought it was my morally self-appointed duty to go out and save? And since there is no group that I feel that way about, I guess I have to reduce it to my own ethnic group. So, if Irish and Puerto Rican people, half and half, like me, myself, were going out there and committing crazy acts of violent crime, would I personally condemn them for doing so? And the answer to that question is not only would I condemn them, but I would actually take out my light wand and slay them myself for their morally depraved behavior. Light wand. It's really cool. Like, I mean, look at that. Look at how awesome that is. Light wand. Going with the Mace Windu edition, by the way. Oops, changed the color. Okay, trying to turn it off now. Now, the reason I can make that declaration, the reason I can make that proclamation, the reason I can make that thing that means something similar that also ends with Asian is because this is an obvious moral thing to do. You can't tolerate violence in our society. The whole point of modern civilization, I mean, America is about preserving freedom, but it's also to stem the violent nature of man, that we settle our disputes in non-violent ways because that's how we have a society. However, the Young Turks, they have a bit of a different perspective. They have a different point of view. They have a different way of looking at this, you could say. Because the Young Turks believe that in situations that make them uncomfortable, the correct moral thing to do is find a representative that is in no way qualified to talk about what needs to be talked about to make it so you can blame your political opposition for problems in our society. And case in point is this conversation video from the Young Turks that I knew I was going to respond to just by looking at their tweet promoting this video. Now, the title of this video is what is really causing anti-Asian violence, and the premise of this video is Cenk finding his Asian employee who he admits is not qualified to report about crime. He's a journalist that talks about climate change and money in politics for the Young Turks, to blame Donald Trump for what's going on. Don't believe me? You can hear it from the man himself that this guy is an environmentalist.
Today we're going to have TY Chang, our investigative reporter at TYT Investigates, join us to talk about something that he cares deeply about, that's very important in the news. Normally his beat is environmental issues and money in politics.
So already this segment, right off the bat, is horrifically racist. They are putting on an Asian guy that happens to work for them, that happens to be a regressive, that happens to hate Donald Trump, solely because he is an Asian guy, to talk about issues that he is not qualified to talk about based on his ethnic origin. Absolutely shameful. The Young Turks ought to be ashamed of themselves. Can I work the word shame one more time into this sentence?
Well, there have been a number of vicious assaults and, in fact, murders of elderly Asians who were just literally walking down the street. I mean, it started with an 89-year-old grandmother set on fire in New York City.
So knowing the Young Turks, knowing how deceptive they are, I am going to be digging into virtually every single case that this guy brings up, and bringing up some other cases that this guy is just not going to talk about, because you know, there's a reason why they're not going to talk about certain cases. Now, this one is an interesting one because this Asian woman wasn't actually set on fire. Her clothing was set on fire. It was a horrific act. I'm not downplaying it. I'm just telling you that this woman is okay, more or less, so you can rest easy knowing that. She was 89, and two suspects who were both age 13 were arrested in connection with this crime. However, they were just charged with third-degree assault and not charged with a hate crime. Now, unfortunately, because they were both minors, we don't have a lot of information other than the fact that these two kids were in fact 13. However, it seems to be implied to me, although this is not confirmed, it's just my speculation, that the two kids were in fact Asian, and this was some kind of just aggressive thing that young boys do, because the NYPD made it very clear that they in no way, shape, or form considered this a hate crime when they arrested the perpetrators. And the only way that I could see that potentially happening is if the perpetrator's ethnic origin somewhat matched the ethnic origin of the victim. Again, if you have evidence to the contrary, please present it in the comments. I will look at it. I will pin that comment if I am wrong about this. But it seems like that's what is going on in relation to this crime. So this might not actually be a biased incident. It's still a targeting of elderly Asians. It's still horrific. It's still disgusting. But when you have a crime that actually was so horrific that it inspired the anti-Asian hate crime task force in the city of New York among the NYPD, and they decided that there was no evidence whatsoever to make any try at charging them with a hate crime, I think it's safe to say that I'm likely right on this scenario.
An 84-year-old grandfather who was shoved to the ground and killed.
So now we're talking about the 84-year-old man who was shoved to the ground that we've talked about multiple times on this channel. You guys should know by now that this man who was killed was actually killed by 19-year-old Antoine Watson, pictured here. And as I've been over this multiple times, when Anton Watson's grandmother went to the courthouse, she talked about how her son deserved to be free and that was her dream, and she and the entire community were behind him. Now, this is on video. You can look it up yourself. This guy ran across the street full speed and shoved this 84-year-old man for no reason. He flew into the garage door and ultimately ended up dying. A real community hero that your grandmother wants to get behind, I imagine.
Another Asian American man in his 60s was sliced across the face on the subway in New York City.
So the suspect in the slashing of the 61-year-old man that he just referenced looks like this. This is the photo that's circulating. As far as I know, they have not made an arrest in that case. I can't show you a picture of the victim because the pictures of his face look really bad. This was an incredibly vicious attack in the subway.
And at least, and also in New York City, Chinatown, there was a stabbing. The guy survived. He's barely survived.
So the suspect in the stabbing that he's referring to is a man named Salman Mulfi'i, and I apologize for mispronouncing that name, or at least I would apologize for mispronouncing that name. But if you don't want your name mispronounced in a video that I'm covering, maybe don't stab an Asian man for looking at you in a way that you didn't like in the city of New York.
Some 3,000 assaults on Asian Americans in the last year, which is a huge increase. As a result, probably because of the pandemic, and primarily, I think, because the President of the United States at the time, the most powerful man in the whole world, kept repeatedly saying China virus, and even mocked the Chinese and Asian Americans by saying Kung Flu virus. And that has an impact. When the President of the United States is saying things like that, then everybody thinks it's okay. It's okay to be a racist.
So unsurprisingly, because I literally told you that he was going to do this, the reason this Young Turks employee, this regressive activist that reports on climate change issues that shouldn't even be discussing these topics in any meaningful way, thinks that the attacks against Asians are on the rise is because of President Donald Trump, because he said China virus, he said Wuhan virus, and he let everybody know that it's okay to be racist. These likely Trump supporters, these likely Trump voters, did all of these attacks because of the evil bad orange man. Now, needless to say, there's a little bit of context missing from this conversation. First and foremost, Donald Trump did not just randomly call it the China virus or the Wuhan coronavirus or any other nickname that he gave the virus to associate with the region that it originated in. Remember, at first, before Trump was even talking about it, the internet was relating this to bat soup, and the media was calling it the Chinese coronavirus, the Chinese variant of coronavirus, the Wuhan coronavirus, etc., etc. And then, all of a sudden, when Donald Trump started using the terms from the mainstream media got mad. But if you think that's the whole story, remember, I skipped a step, because the only reason that Trump started adopting the terms of the mainstream media is because the Chinese government started putting out propaganda claiming that the United States military was actually responsible for the virus. So what was actually happening was jockeying for global position during a pandemic between a would-be superpower and the sole superpower of the world, the United States of America. So he wasn't doing it to be racist or to tell his supporters to be racist. He was doing it to counter a narrative attack put forward by the Chinese government in order to cover up their malfeasance in handling this pandemic.
This country has a race problem. There's a lot of racism and among a lot of races toward each other, including Asians toward others and everybody else toward us.
We have a race problem in this country, including Asians toward others and everybody else towards us. Again, this is the words of an Asian man. It's funny, though, how he just doesn't want to name the actual problem. Obviously, these attacks are extremely disproportionately coming from one demographic of people in the United States of America. There are attacks that he didn't name that also line up with this pattern. And if the Young Turks wanted to interview a journalist that, was relevantly connected to the topic, I have been listing one and putting her Twitter on screen and linking her in the description because she is doing a much better job than even I am in just documenting these cases in the Bay Area. And she doesn't appear to be documenting this with any political bias other than the fact that she wants to stop anti-Asian hate crimes. If I were going to interview anybody for more detailed accounts of these individual cases in the Bay Area, it would be Dion Lim, not some random Asian person that happens to work for the network that typically covers environmental issues.
The coronavirus did start in China, and some ignorant people will think, well, that means every Asian person that's carrying the virus or caused it.
Now, this is a part I definitely agree with. It's incredibly stupid to presume or assume that any random Asian person on the street has any connection to the problems in mainland China due to the government of mainland China. Remember, a lot of these people aren't even ethnically Chinese. Some of them that are ethnically Chinese are from Taiwan, a nation that tried to warn us that China was lying and covering this up, but the WHO doesn't recognize Taiwan. Same situation with Hong Kong. They had experts that were trying to warn us. And even people from mainland China, part of the reason why they moved to the United States of America is because they don't agree with the policies of the Communist Party of China. These make no sense on any level. This is the one point I agree with him on, even though he's about to spin you a bit of a yarn right after this.
Although viruses pop up all over the world, and SARS started in this country in a pig farm in North Carolina.
So when I first heard this, my first instinct, honestly, was to let it go, because it's a weird point-scoring exercise where you're trying to say, America started this virus, therefore it's all equal, when in reality, what makes the origin of the coronavirus relevant is the fact that the Chinese Communist Party covered it up and let the virus get out into the world, and then try to blame the US government for it. However, I decided to look into this because the Young Turks always lie, and I couldn't find any evidence whatsoever that the virus, SARS-1, started in a pig farm in North Carolina. Now, it might be the case because I found a ton of irrelevant information, a ton of relevant information, but as best as I can tell, SARS-1 also originated in Asia and most likely originated in China. However, there were a bunch of reports about how industrial farming could possibly produce pandemics, and there are SARS variants that didn't make the jump to humans that have been found in farms in the United States of America, which was even more interesting because I remembered in China they had a big problem because there was a disease in their pork supply that was causing all of their pigs to die, which was even weirder because then I found out that the word for meat in China actually means pork, and that's why they have so many freaking pigs in that country, because they are obsessed. It's like the favorite meat of the nation. So I thought that was interesting. I wanted to share it with you. And maybe there's some connection with the fact that all these pigs died and that pigs can pass and generate SARS variants and the current pandemic that we have. Now, there's no evidence of that. I just thought of it and I thought it was cool and I wanted to present it to you. But honestly, this is what I got from looking into this ridiculous claim, or this pointless claim that's about point scoring and being anti-American.
So that's the reason why it's happening. But there's been a long history of racism against Asians. We're always the other people. And it's combined now where we're sort of like the model minority, so that some white people look at us as a people of color, but people of color look at us as sort of like these kind of wannabe white people. So we're sort of caught in between sometimes.
So here he's getting a little bit closer to what's actually going on. Now, I've referenced this essay multiple times, and I've referenced Thomas Sowell in relation to this problem because I think it's really important to talk about how this is not a new phenomenon. In fact, the attacks on Asians by African Americans in the United States of America, where else would the attacks from African Americans actually be occurring but the United States of America, but I said it anyway, aren't new. Thomas Sowell was writing about this decades ago, about how this was a problem, and the model minority myth that the left perpetuates is a part of that problem. Because according to left-wing ideology, Asians were hand-selected by white people to forward white supremacy by making them successful. And as Thomas Sowell has written about multiple times, if you look at the Asian shop owners and actually, assess their lives in an academic way, rather than just assume that it's a white supremacist conspiracy that allows them to be successful, what you find out is things like in Atlanta, where Korean shop owners are actually quite popular in black neighborhoods. Turns out those Korean shop owners work on average for 4 years in order to save enough money to open up these small shops. The cost of entry of those shops is about $10,000. And a quarter of these Koreans, who by the way did not come from business owning families in their native Korea, worked 2 jobs in order to do that. So what's actually happening here is what always happens when there's successful middleman minorities in your society. The other groups that aren't successful, they may be minorities themselves, but majorities in the region, think that the success of this other minority group is due to the fact that they're conspiring against them, and they think that their success is to their detriment. You have all these Korean shops siphoning money out of the black neighborhoods. I'm sure you've heard this rhetoric before. That all gins up hatred over time and leads to these attacks. And we've seen these results time and time again, not just in black neighborhoods in the United States of America, not just in the United States of America, but across the world. The Jews are a great example of this. The Armenians in Turkey, Chinese people outside of China, but not necessarily in the United States of America. I'm talking about Chinese people in Malaysia, Vietnam, etc., etc. We've seen this with Indian people in Africa. We've seen this with the Lebanese in Africa. Time and time again, people assume that successful middleman minorities are somehow conspiring against them and secretly controlling our society. And in black neighborhoods, we've seen this happen to not only Asian people, but Jewish people, and also Caribbean black people, people who are the same racially, but happen to be immigrants from places like Trinidad. So what's not being said here in this Young Turks video and across the mainstream media, which is really getting under my skin at this point, is that these are the problems of you assuming that people are successful due to conspirators pulling the strings. These are the problems when you tell people that it's a zero-sum game and somebody else succeeding means that you're failing. These are the problems when you look at a successful minority group and rather than try to emulate their success, their hard work, their dedication to education, you decide to hate them because what you see is all the flaws in yourself.
So, Tiwa, I know there's some facts to back up what you're saying. Obviously, there's 31% increase in anti-Asian racist slurs and jokes since the coronavirus began.
Well, I'm glad you're here, Cenk, to back up his claims with statistics. A 31% increase in anti-Asian slurs and jokes since the start of the coronavirus. And I'm 190% sure that that is a legitimate statistic that's actually measuring something because Cenk just cited it with no source whatsoever, and that's totally a relevant part of the conversation. This is what I can't stand about lefties. They talk about people yelling things or slurs or, in this case, anti-Asian jokes as if that is the meat of the problem. Remember, people are being murdered, people are being stabbed, they're being assaulted, they're being robbed, and this is what they want to talk about. And the reason they want to talk about this is because you can find people that don't line up with what's actually happening, the actual problem, making jokes, and if you just mash all that together, you can kind of cover up the thing that you don't want to talk about, mainly who's doing these crimes and what reasons undergird the crimes being committed.
And by the way, if we're looking at who's spreading the virus the most, that is clearly us, all of us Americans. It's not, yes, it started in China, but they got it under control very quickly, whereas we let it rage and rage and rage. And unfortunately, we spread it to other countries as well. We had the worst number of cases, worst number of deaths in America than any other country.
Oh, by the way, I don't know if you know this, but Cenk now repeats Chinese communist propaganda on his network. The Chinese government, they got it under control incredibly quickly. I mean, they let people travel from Wuhan when they knew this virus was out. They suppressed information. They targeted and maybe even killed some of the whistleblowers. They sealed people physically into their homes. They've been lying about their numbers, obviously, but they got it under control incredibly incredibly quickly. The people that are having the problems, United States of America, we have the most of all the bad numbers, even though we have the third largest population and probably the most accurate testing compared to the countries that have a higher population than us, India and China. So obviously we would have higher raw numbers, and you should look at the per capita numbers, but the US is the worst. Chinese Communist Party, absolutely excellent. Jeffrey Katzenberg, thanks for that $25 million. I will do the bidding of Disney, the corporation that you used to work for, no problem. Chinese Communist Party, absolutely amazing. They got it under control, absolutely elegant in every way.
By the way, you said SARS started here, so did the Spanish flu. Ironically, Spain was the only one addressing it, so people heard it was coming from Spain. Everybody else was doing censorship. It actually started with American soldiers in Kansas. So we've been through this before, and there's a lot of propaganda that goes along with it.
Again, a weird point-scoring exercise to bring up a different virus that's not currently a problem now and try to pin it on the United States of America. But what's great about this is, just like the last time, historians do not think the Spanish flu actually originated in the United States of America, in Kansas, in that military base. They actually believe, wait for it, that the Spanish flu originated in China. Now, it's not confirmed, we're not 100% sure, but our absolute best guess, according to a multitude of experts, is that the virus originated there, and actually Chinese laborers brought the virus over to Canada. Nice try, Cenk. Thanks for playing. Your irony is actually more ironic because it's the country that you're covering for, not the country that you live in and you're smearing for some reason, because rhetorical point-scoring exercises. Again, doesn't mean anything. It was a worldwide pandemic, but that's where it originated, most likely.
But in this case, some of the assailants, whether it's Northern California or New York, where most of the cases are, as you gave several examples of, are of different races, different motivations, it appears. One of the worst attackers seems to have mental health issues. So how sure are we that it's related to the epidemic and how Trump riled people up against Asians within that pandemic?
So Cenk's saying that the attackers actually appear to be from multiple races, multiple backgrounds, is his way of soft-pedaling the idea that the attackers are overwhelmingly, disproportionately black people in the United States of America. Now, of the cases named by Cenk's guest, one of them was an Arab or a Muslim guy. I don't actually know his origin, but you guess based on looking at him. But overall, the trend is what the trend is. But Cenk's like, oh, it's multiple people. It's a lot of people doing it. And I don't really see the connection with Trump because statistically, the people who we keep arresting for actually doing this happen to be people who are least likely to have voted for Trump.
So this is something that when you have a president setting something up like that, you establish a precedent that says it's okay to be racist. And I think he established that for the country, and he said it very often. My dog apparently agrees. Anyway, so I think when you say that, for example, oh, that's a deranged person. Well, what other person stabs an old man in the back? And then the person who stabbed the man in New York City in Chinatown said that I didn't like the way he looked at me, which meant he had to look at his face if he didn't like the way he looked at him.
So again, Salman again, if you want me to pronounce your name correctly, maybe don't stab somebody for looking at you the incorrect way, is somehow connected to Trump, even though statistically, this is not likely to be a person that is within Donald Trump's base. A New York person with a Middle Eastern sounding name.
Yes, most of the attacks have been verbal, but a good percentage, it's now roughly nearly 10%, have become physical assaults. And we have a number of people, elderly people, being killed.
Also, he brings up the fact that 10% of these attacks are violent, and I just have to say, who cares about the other 90%? Should you be saying rude, racist things to people out in public, on the street, whether they anger you or whether it's random? Absolutely not. You're a bad person for doing that. But the 10% that are violent, that is the key component. That's what we're actually dealing with. You can say mean words in the United States of America. Freedom of speech covers hate speech because hate speech does not exist. Now, that being said, the 10% of violent attacks is the number one concern. That's 100% of the issue. Why are we even talking about this 90% of people saying mean things? Why are we even talking about a 31% uptick in racial slurs and racist jokes in the United States of America when we have horrific violence in this country?
In San Francisco, it was a 91-year-old, or it was Oakland, 91-year-old man shoved from behind. For what? I mean, who does that?
Yahya Muslim shoved that 91-year-old man. This guy is the person who did that. Didn't you read the report? You don't want to talk about that? Not interested in that? Because it was Yahya Muslim.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got to assume somebody's already a little bit deranged, but where did that deranged come from? Why did you pick an Asian old man? Why aren't there all old people being attacked? And there's a reason for that. The reason is the pandemic. People are probably a little crazy from the pandemic, but also because the president kept saying repeatedly, China virus, Kung Fu virus. That has an effect on people. It says, hey, it's okay.
So according to Cenk's guest, Yahya Muslim shoved a 91-year-old man to the ground and then proceeded to attack two other elderly Asians during the same day because Donald Trump said Wuhan coronavirus or China virus months prior when he was actually president. It has nothing to do with the fact that the Oakland police have been defunded to the point where they can't put out officers on patrol in order to deter some of these crimes. It has nothing to do with the fact that Yahya Muslim is a multiple-time felon who shouldn't have been let out of prison. And the attacks in the Bay Area also have nothing to do with the fact that Chesa Boudin, the radical left-wing DA, put into power by people like Sean King who raised a ton of money for him, don't prosecute any criminals and repeatedly let out violent felons to attack and victimize people on the streets again.
They're not. And then he even said, he made a statement, oh, Asian Americans are good. They're on our side. Well, wait, our side, meaning we're not part of America? That's a key issue here. Asians are not seen as being American.
Now look, I won't ding you for nitpicking Donald Trump's language within a certain amount of reason, because Donald Trump was the president of the United States. It's important for the president of the United States to be able to communicate information, and let's be honest, Trump wasn't the best at communicating information. However, when he said Asian Americans are on our side, you taking that as he's separating them from Americans is you intentionally taking that in the worst possible way. Obviously, he was saying Asian Americans are Americans. They're on our side. They're with us because it's true.
I was born and raised in New York City. Can't tell you how many times people say, where are you from? I say, New York. They say, no, where are you really from? And then I ask them, I say, well, where are you from?
And they tell you what their ethnic origin is when you ask them that, because that's a common question that New Yorkers get asked all the time, and it's not unique to non-white people.
Well, I'm from New York. I don't know. Where are you from? You don't look like a Native American to me. Somewhere along the line, you're from somewhere.
So this conversation that he's talking about, where he was asked where he was from, and he said New York, and they said, where are you really from? And then he asked them, where are you from? And then they said New York, and then he said, no, where are you really from? You don't look like a Native American. Never happened at any point whatsoever in this person's life. He is 100% lying and being a regressive crybaby. New Yorkers ask each other all the time, where are you from? Because New York is an ethnically diverse melting pot. When they wanted to do a DNA study of the human race, they chose Astoria, Queens because it was literally the most diverse place on planet Earth. So the idea that this person who has lived in New York his whole life is clutching his pearls when people ask him this question that he's been asked his whole life by all manner of people, including other Asian people, is absolutely ridiculous. And again, it's just more fluff, more nonsense to distract from the main point that they don't want to talk about who's actually doing the attacks and the reasons why they are doing the attacks. So there's about 5 more minutes left in this video, and honestly, I don't have the energy to go through it because they don't cover anything relevant or interesting within that time frame. They just meander into random topics related to Chinese people and their history with America that have nothing to do with anything that we're talking about now. But it is amusing to me that they want to make you feel guilty because in the 1800s, Chinese people were among the groups of laborers who built the railroads. That's something you should feel white guilt over right now, I guess, because we don't make it to the West Coast without those laborers. Again, not saying that they're not important in our history, not saying that they weren't discriminated against in our history, but this is a weird flex in the middle of us talking about an epidemic of hate crimes in the Bay Area that are largely being committed by Black Americans. But honestly, what do I even expect at this point? Do I expect them to actually go over the history of middlemen minorities, and specifically the history of middlemen minorities in relation to Black Americans in the United States, and specifically Asian middlemen minorities and their relationship to Black America? Absolutely not, because that would actually be scratching the surface of something related to what we're talking about. But hey, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like my video, then leave me a like. You can subscribe for more content. Follow me on my social medias. They are linked in the description. You can support me via the support links also in the description. Everything's in the description. Check the description. It's amazing. Till next time.